Hello, and welcome to Feedback for the week of December 7th, the beginning of December, which means the beginning of the end of the year. Not anything more.
Not anymore, Anonymous.
Nothing more ominous than that.
2012.
Yeah.
Couple years.
Yes. I learned so much from Roland Emmerich, such as clearly don't live in a very well-known building.
Welcome to
because it
Earth.
will be destroyed in his world. Obviously, we are joined by our illustrious panel. We have Patrick Klepek.
Hello.
We have Brian Leahy.
Hi.
And we have Abby Happy. So this is definitely the period of time when things start winding down news-wise. Really, there hasn't been much going on, but it looks like that you found a couple of things that really are definitely of note this week.
Yeah,
Patrick,
there
so
are
let's jump
some.
into it.
Yeah, there's some announcements coming out through the end of the year. No surprise, has been rumored, leaked a number of times, but Dead Space 2 is coming from Visceral Games and EA sometime next year. Isaac Clarke is returning. Not quite sure how that's happening yet. I'm sure there's a will, there's a way. And the rumor is also in conjunction with those leaks is that they're going to somehow get multiplayer into Dead Space.
Why not?
Somehow.
Throw it in there.
Why not?
Whatever.
I mean, they're probably going, well, Bioshock's doing it. Why can't we? Now, is there anyone here on this panel that actually thought that Dead Space would have somehow been enhanced by having multiplayer?
No.
No, I mean that was a game that was based in isolation. Like it was you were by yourself and you were communicating with other characters, but really it was you against this army. And the only really way I can see it working is if Isaac Clarke, one person was Isaac Clarke, you were the main character, and then maybe everyone else took a role as the Necromorphs, kind of like Left 4 Dead.
Left 4
I see
Dead.
potential there.
I could see that as well. I mean, also, you do have a crew, however briefly, in the
For a minute, I suppose.
so I could see them bringing in other crew members. But again, the only way I could really think to pull that off in a way that would be unique would be to kind of rip the Left 4 Dead thing. Not to say that wouldn't be
But now the more
good,
that I think
the
about
Darkness
it,
also tried that, and it didn't really work either.
but the more that I
Many things didn't work in the darkness. I think we dispute on this one, but yeah.
I did not
I'd
dislike
play
that
as a
game.
necromorph. I'd shamble up to somebody slowly, giving them time to sever my limbs procedurally. Or I could play on the human side. I'd be the guy behind the glass that just gets attacked by the monster behind him.
I love the idea, though, if you play the Necromorph, especially the crawling ones, that you would have to use the Steel Battalion controller and kind of like really get into the kind of the shambling
finally
quality.
a third use for that controller.
Well, I mean, I think it makes a wonderful, wonderful necklace. Or even like if you have good adhesive, it's a brooch. The
That
Steel
is
Battalion
something
controller.
you could do with it.
I guess the one thing that I find somewhat troubling about the idea that there can be multiplayer in Dead Space is that we've been talking here about how a lot of these new IPs weren't really working for EA. Clearly, Dead Space was one that they feel confident with to go forward. Yet now it's coupled with this idea that the multiplayer was actually the issue of why this thing didn't go off the charts as we had hoped it would. I mean, is there more that we can read into this in adding multiplayer where it really seems like an odd fit?
I think multiplayer is the longevity booster for a game. So if you add multiplayer, hopefully people will continue to play it. The more people are playing it at the time, the better DLC will sell.
But it's supposed to be the longevity for a game. It doesn't usually translate into that. I mean,
How many people are still playing Uncharted 2 multiplayer?
Yeah.
Even if you thought you liked it when it came out.
I know.
Are you,
Exactly.
are you still
No,
playing
I'm
it,
not.
Adam?
I'm not. And then you look at a game like Fear 2, which it had fine multiplayer, but I mean, I think we never even thought going into it that this was really going to be a game changer or something that people were really going to be, have an affinity for.
Well, I think too, as communities emerge on consoles, and because PC always had that as well, you tend to notice that your friends gravitate towards one game or another, and so your impetus is to play those games with them, and it really, and so when everybody on your list is only playing one game, you tend to say, oh, well, I'll just play that one.
Well, personally, I mean, the decision for me to actually buy a game and not rent it or just borrow it, multiplayer plays a big thing into that because I say, well, if I'm going to play this for 8 hours and have the experience and be done with it, I don't necessarily need to buy it because when's the next time I'm going to really want to play through it again? But if it has multiplayer, I might be like, oh, well, I can play this with some friends. If they pick it up, maybe I'll go buy it.
I mean, there's other reasons why I keep one as well. Copies of the game, whether it's there's so much to do in it or it's bigger. But
Yeah, I bought Fallout.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
it is worth pointing out, though, to Brian's point, that the sales of Dead Space and the number of people that played Dead Space were actually quite disparate because so many people did buy it used. That I think it's a more widely played game than it was a purchase game.
It had really good word of mouth, and the more I think about how Dead Space could possibly I see, even though the isolation worked really well on Dead Space, I see co-op or a co-op experience, kind of like a Spec Ops sort of thing. Like I can see
mode.
Separate. For me, it would have to be separate from.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I think I think our immediate fear is like, well, they're just tossing in deathmatch. Because that's really, that would be simple. That would be very easy for them to do. But I think you could do something interesting. I guess it's just, we are seeing so many games doing it. It makes sense to err on the side of caution that it's not going to be any good.
But I also found Dead Space very replayable without multiplayer. I thought it was interesting. There was scary. I thought that a lot of the scares were a little telepathed by the audio in the game, which was one of the big problems that I had with it.
The music was way too bombastic in that game.
Actually, let's listen to a quote from Darth Lucre because it points that right now. Finally, I've been waiting forever for them to announce this. The first was probably the first video game ever to actually scare me, and I'm not talking about little startling moments where something would jump out at you. I mean, full on running for my life scared. Don't know about running because that's one thing I don't remember doing very well.
You just hold A.
He's clearly never played Alien versus Predator.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. We all really like Dead Space. I love just kind of the combat and the uniqueness of the weapons. But as far as it actually being kind of like, I'm scared.
I'm not sure it was scary, but it was very tense. Like I always felt on edge or on my toes,
Sure.
and I would get startled, but it was never a moment like the scariest game that came out I think for me the last couple of years was the Siren game that came out for PS2, which was genuinely just I thought terrifying. But Dead Space was very tense. I wouldn't describe it as scary, but you were always like something's coming. It was a game that, even though most of the game was predicated on monster closets, it worked for the game, I thought.
Well,
it worked pretty well.
I think the other thing that I'd like to see them change in terms of scares is with the enemy AI, if you get killed and you die, the way that you're playing through the room that you're going through is exactly the same as the way that you played it before. And I think that if you were playing through again and something different happened that you weren't necessarily expecting, it would be naturally scarier.
I will take multiplayer as long as there are no more turret shooting sequences blowing up asteroids.
Oh my god!
You can put whatever you want in the game as long as you take away the turret sequence.
You know, they don't even do that anymore in the Ratchet franchise. Yeah. So yeah, I mean,
I still have the space sequences.
Yeah,
every time.
You know what? No, I wasn't even thinking of Ratchet. I was thinking of Jak and Daxter. They had, I think, in Jak 2 and Jak 3, and it was some of the most challenging and frustrating sequences in that franchise. Also, we have a little bit of news about a very happy company.
Yeah, Take-Two's not doing very well overall.
Yes.
And it's increasingly like there's going to be no new Grand Theft Auto next year, so the company will not achieve profitability. But Borderlands is a game that it turns out that Take-Two, we saw the sales did really well according to the NPD figures, but overall they seem very excited. And one thing we've been critical about feedback is it's weird when companies won't just admit, of course we're going to make a sequel. Take-Two has been very forthcoming, calling it a franchise and really emphasizing shareholders, we're going to have sequels to this. We're pushing forward this very quickly. And so I think, especially because I think we all knew that this was very important to Gearbox, and if this game didn't do well, especially because who knows what's happening with the other Aliens game they've been working on for years, if this didn't do well, this was going to be, a bad sign for Gearbox's longevity, at least as being an independent developer. Yeah. And it sounds like this has been a wild success for them and for Take-Two.
Now, has there been any indication of when that sequel would come?
It sounds like it's going to come a lot faster than we might have thought.
Which is interesting, because I think a discussion I've had with almost all of you, when we're not on the radio, because believe it or not, we actually talk when we're not doing the show, is that this game just seems to me like something of a gold mine in terms of DLC.
Sure.
That just keep on slapping on stuff like the Zombie Island of Dr. Ned, and you can actually buy a lot of time and generate revenue as you work on a sequel for it.
I tend to be toward the other end of the spectrum for Borderlands. I loved it. I reviewed it. I thought it was a great game, but I would like to see sort of another revision that adds a lot more that you couldn't necessarily do with DLC on the level of like Rock Band to Rock Band 2, where
or Left 4 Dead, where everyone, Left 4 Dead was supposed to be the platform, and now it looks like Left 4 Dead 2 is going to be the one where we get the real longevity. Because I feel like in your review and what I've heard from other people, there are a lot of refinements that you're not going to get in DLC. Right. You need an actual sequel to iterize on the character development, which seems to be the big thing.
That's what I'm looking forward to in a sequel in this, is that they clearly worked on all these other aspects, and it definitely shows in the game, but they may not have appreciated how compelling the world and some of those quirky characters are, that I kind of wanted to see them animated and doing things with me. I mean, one of those rare times, like, go to a cutscene. I kind of want to see this. I mean, it's just so interesting. I so love being in that world.
Yeah, and Zombie Island of Dr. Ned is really cool as well. It's a very different world than you're accustomed to. It's not the rocks and dirt. You've got trees and swamps. And I would be really interested to see moving forward for a sequel, whether they keep it in the same planet and keep it in the same world, or try to expand and try to really increase the environments that you're playing in.
I think they have to. I mean, the last level, I won't say what it is if you haven't played Borderlands yet, but it's very different from the rest of the game, and I think they really sort of struggled to fit that in. Like, now look, it's different. And with Dr. Ned, just a completely different world. I think they have to, because I liked the game, I loved all the quests, but seeing that palette after 20 hours was a little old.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if they really, if we have to assume that is all of Pandora. I mean, it never establishes how large the world is, and that, some sort of variety in the terrain, I think they're not going to be pushing the boundaries of what the player expects.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because I think Borderlands was a surprise for a lot of people in terms of how good it turned out, in terms of how well it sold. So, I think this is one of those cases where the success of a game like Left 4 Dead 2 might be encouraging for them to hold back on the DLC, which very clearly could have, considering they had stuff come out almost 2.5 weeks after the game was out. I could see them pulling back on the DLC and just getting a sequel, turning that into a more fleshed out sequel that takes a lot of that DLC. Now it's weird. I know I'm going to get crap for recommending that they hold back on the DLC and put it into a sequel, but I think there are very iterative changes that need to happen that you're not going to see, that I think we would be much happier with a bigger game.
Right, with a new game. I think if you... We're all saying, like, yeah, we'll get a game really soon out of Gearbox. I love you, Randy. I love you so much. But if there's one thing that studio is so not known for, it is expediency in the development process. But I think it's good. And I think our viewer, I don't know what to call them, Chris Hero 22, it's so nice to finally see a publisher not worried about leaking information or hiding things. The game was good and successful, and they want the word out that a sequel is coming as fast as possible. Great philosophy. Is there something? I mean, we are like not just us, but our readers are remarking on the fact that they just kind of said it.
But I think at the same time, you say this about a company like Take-Two or EA or whatever, but then Activision will turn around and be like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and announce Guitar Hero 6 through 20. And everyone's like, screw you, Activision, you money, you just want money. You're milking it. And it's
it's a little bit, I know, 10 SKUs is a little different than one.
Well, because when Bobby Kotick does it, you kind of anticipate there's an evil cackle that will then follow that. Like, he knows we don't want it either. And it's just, I'm going to flood the world. It's like a Bond villain.
Or Valve announces one a year later and everybody boycotts it.
Yeah. That was...
You can't please everybody.
Anyway. It's true.
Yeah, I demand you take longer with your games, Valve.
It's not so much you can't please anybody. You can't please everybody. You can't please anybody. That's, I think, what it really has come down to. Our final story, Patrick, is actually something of a shock.
Yeah,
at least for me.
We were talking about Left 4 Dead, but yes, pretty much out of nowhere, Kim Swift, who is one of the co-designers of Portal, she had come... Narbacular Drop, something like Narbacular Drop, which is what Val, was a developer project, a student project that Val picked up that eventually turned into Portal. Kim Swift was also involved in Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead 2. She'd been a very prominent, sort of figurehead for Valve and going out and talking about their development process, especially for how successful Portal had been. And she pretty much out of nowhere. It's a couple weeks after Left 4 Dead 2, so I think it's not out of nowhere so much as timed for after Left 4 Dead 2 is out. She's leaving Valve, and she's taking up a project lead position at Airtight Games, which is the studio currently finishing up Dark Void for Capcom. And she's going to be working on something, generically they're calling more diverse games for a larger audience. Which
does it mean casual games
that kind of scares me, but
Facebook.
And Valve has not commented so far. They haven't, it's confirmed she's left, but they've issued no. Usually it's a kind of a congratulatory statement or a we wish her well, and there's been nothing out of Valve so
now
far.
She made a statement herself, which was, I've learned so much, I've had some amazing experiences at Valve, but when I heard I had the opportunity to work on innovative titles with my friends over at Airtight, I couldn't pass it up. One of the things I think stands out from this is I've never heard of someone leaving Valve.
Yeah.
That, it's just, I hear
that's
people going in,
but
nobody comes out.
You tend to hear people leaving companies of that stature to go form their own companies, not joining other teams. But, who knows what they're letting her do and
there's a good
what
team
the
at
opportunity
Airtight
is.
too,
Yeah,
no. Airtight, just for those people out there, is working on Dark Void. The off-delayed game that now seems hell-bent on getting that late January release date, which I think is also comprised of some of the people that worked back on the Crimson Sky series, which is why you see some of the similar art styles.
And I think that speaks to why this is a shock is only just because who leaves Valve? Like that's pretty much it. And of the information we have so far, we don't have a lot of details that explain why that was really compelling, considering how much we respect Valve and the creative process they get to do. It's just like, why would you leave that?
I think I've volunteered to be their office pet. I'm like, I'll just sit there. You don't have to pay me.
Valve and a couple of other places like Bungie or something like that is where it's kind of like if you're a local news reporter and you finally get to the New York or LA markets, like you've done it.
Yeah,
and
you've
it's your
made it.
end game.
Yeah.
You don't go anywhere else from there. You don't go to other places.
Well, we wish her well, and if she can bring what she brought to Portal somewhere else, that's not a bad thing.
That's all good.
Absolutely.
A quick comment from user Gravy666. I love that name. He says, "The leaving is a lie." See. I mean, that's the thing is once you come up with such a famous line, people are going to question
Gonna
you for
haunt
the
her.
rest of your life.
Yep.
So this week we made an announcement. It was the Best of 2009. I hate saying nominees, so I'm going to use the word I like to use, which is shortlist, because it sounds British. And
It does sound more sophisticated.
Yeah, and also nominees, you always think of like the Oscars, and so it's not the Oscars, kids. it's an editorial group of people, getting together and making some decisions.
The daytime Emmys.
You make us sound not, so shabby.
Well, more like the Oscars is what happens at GDC, where the very game developers vote on their own. It kind of makes more sense. Now, the way that we did it this year, for those that don't read and didn't read the thing that I put up at the top of the post on our website, g4tv.com, is that this was done by balloting, and we ranked the games. And first we just looked at the raw votes that each game got, and then we went to those weighted numbers to break some ties, and some ties did exist that where it was very, very useful. I don't think it was, even though we didn't get in a room and yell at one another, I don't think that like those lists were terribly shocking.
No,
in terms of what
the last couple of years, there's just a lot of good games.
Yeah.
And so there ends up being, what your top is always, up for debate, but there's always kind of a consensus on like the 5 to 7, just like, of course those are going to be up there because, they were just that good.
They're just really strong games. It is interesting. I know this is going to sidetrack us, but we talk about how like there are these good games. Have you noticed, especially in this generation, there are less crappy games that are kind of sold as high profile games? And we have like kind of the shovelware that shows up in the PC and the DS, but we don't see kind of like the game that was like the site from the previous generation is like Brute Force or Black. These kind of like these more consistent stuff that Azuric. There's this middle of the road stuff. We don't I think there are just sort of fewer games.
I think the high end good stuff is better, and the bad stuff is more identifiably bad. Like it's just like the technology gap, the talent gap is so wide now. Yeah,
and I mean, the cost of developing plays into it. And also, if you're not a great studio and you can't make something that looks up to spec on the current gen, it's easily seen on the 360, PS3, that game does not have great animation, and I can see it. So maybe I'll ignore it, and it'll get priced at a lower price point.
And then you kind of go, I don't have to pay attention to you, there, bad game. Let's talk about, let's go ahead and just chat for a second about Game of the Year. The picks are Assassin's Creed 2, Borderlands, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Infamous, Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. If anyone thinks that by ordering it that way there was some sort of, underlying, strategy, no, they're alphabetized. Check it out. Back up my word. I'm right on this one. I guess the only games that could have also found their way in there would have been a Halo 3 ODST, Left 4 Dead 2. But I mean, I actually really like looking at this lineup of 5 games.
Mm-hmm.
And what's encouraging about this, and this is we're all guilty in the media. This is forgetting games that come before September, and it's cool to see a game like Infamous on there that came out back in May, because it's just. I mean, everything gets lumped, but there are always, a game.
There are always things that you forget about that were at the beginning of the year, and you're like, God, was that this year?
Did I have fun? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's easy to forget because, 9-10 months have passed, but, it's cool to see a game like Infamous recognized.
Yeah, I see everybody ignored my suggestion of 50 Cent Blood on the Sand for best shooter.
I just played it last night for the first time. It's awesome. It's great.
Know.
Yeah, it is.
That was the game this year that I thousanded out in achievement points. I loved it.
The random profanity done by 50 Cent fits so much better than the random profanity by Mickey Rourke in Rogue Warrior.
The end made me laugh so hard.
Well, it's also just the story, because it is so divorced from any reality, and it's even if you read it as 50's own fantasy, it is such a glorious fantasy. The fact that Damien Hirsch's diamond skull, which is one of the most obscene things ever to grace the art market, somehow found itself finally useful in the hands of 50 Cent as a motivating factor to go around the Middle East blowing people up.
Well, not to mention that the shooting mechanics in it are great. It's very much like The Club, which is a game I actually liked that didn't really do very well, I think, critically or commercially.
No.
But there were some very good elements of it that they replicated and made so much better in 50 Cent. And I swear, it was so weird. I had trouble telling people, like, I really love this game. And then I'm like, no, play it.
No,
It's like $10 at Newegg right now.
Yeah, seriously.
I went and played it. I told Kevin Pereira to play it, and we were on on the Attack of the Show together. It was just both like, I can't believe I'm saying this. This is a great game.
Game of the year runner-up.
Yes,
50
exactly.
Right there. Blood on the sand.
So, Abby, I'm going to let that be just
Honorable
one of your
Hollow.
things that you're mentioning for one of your favorites of the year. Brian, on the list or off the list? What really stood out for you personally for 2009?
Well, I mean, the Game of the Year picks are pretty expected there. I think a lot of people have been calling for, Killzone 2 to be there. Kind of don't agree with that. I personally would have liked to have seen Street Fighter 4 there. The impact that game had for relaunching 2D fighting here and in Japan was pretty huge. So I would have liked to see that, but I understand it's more of a niche game.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, so it is interesting with Street Fighter 4 how we are getting Super Street Fighter 4 next year, and that sense that they may have finally kind of reinvigorated with this. Because if you look right now on the fighting game section, I think it is it's the one area where we couldn't actually come up with 5. Because we're not going to just add on 2 games that we don't think are good,
right?
Just for the sake of having a nice, prime number. But it's very nice to see Street Fighter doing that. Patrick, is there a game on the list or off the list that stands out for you as one of your best of the year?
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by there's 2 new IPs on there, Borderlands and Infamous getting in that list, on its own, I think is really encouraging. When I am voting, I knew I was throwing a vote into the abyss when I put Flower as my number 3 game of the year. And it is in the best original category, which I'm crossing my fingers for. But I feel like this is one of the first years where I felt okay putting something like that on a list like that, because we're getting to that point, we've talked about this a number of times, where these games are, I think they're getting more recognized and valued, and it's not just, well, this was the big game this year, so of course it's got to be in that top 5. I put that in there, and I knew I was putting it, I knew it wasn't going to win, but I didn't do it, as a joke.
No,
I sent quite a few choices to die this year.
Yeah, I thought it was a joke, actually. I took it as a joke.
What's so funny is that when I see Flower and I think of Flower, I still think of the skunk from Bambi. And yes, I grew up in the 30s. Everybody.
I remember the skunk from Bambi.
I was caught off guard by the
But I know. I mean, I love
just think
Flower,
of
but
Bambi.
to your point about a game that typically we wouldn't want to offer up for a top 5 list because it is smaller. I had to do the same thing with Shadow Complex because for me personally, that game just massaged a muscle I didn't realize was really sore. It's just like that. I'm tired of describing
So. Is that an obscure reference?
No, that's a new thing. It goes, bah. It's like unfortunate reference counter goes right there. It just, I did not realize how much I missed playing a game that was designed like that, and to play a game that was so like where the mechanics were just solid in that type of format. And like I've gone back and played through it twice. It's just there's something that just it's probably one that after you drink 3 or 4 beers, you can still pretty much progress through it quite comfortably. And there is you can.
You can.
I loved it, but it took a little ding for me when I didn't realize I was about to beat the game, and then I beat the game, and I was like, oh
yeah.
Wait, it's over.
It is. If you are trying to do a completist run, going all the way through, there should have been that, like, hold on, if you want everything, think about it now. But there's just a lot of fun with that. And I do hope that those guys at Chair Entertainment get to actually do some follow-ups, because I'm never going to read the writing of Orson Scott Card, and so this is as close as I can get to that guy. So let's chat for a second also about Best Original Game. This is a category that is kind of near and dear, I don't think just to XPlay and G4TV.com's hearts, I think to many other outlets out there, that we do bemoan the fact that, kind of like incumbent senators, that sequels tend to be favored because, there's so much expertise, the team is there and it's solid, and they already have their tech, that games that really are a new IP tend to have a little bit more of a struggle to even get attention in the marketplace. Sure. I think the one that, as we were just talking about earlier, Borderlands, I think was just a shoo-in. to be on this list because everyone's gone kind of gaga over that. But the others we have are Brutal Legend, Flower, see right there, Mr. Klepek,
Ding.
Scribblenauts, and Shadow Complex for best original game. Abby, I mean, in terms of original games, do you think this was a good year or a bad year?
I actually think it was a good year, although I take exception to one of the choices on the list. Am I allowed to talk?
What could it be?
Yeah, it's Scribblenauts.
Yeah.
And no, and to be fair, I played the whole game. I loved many aspects of it. The gameplay did not work. And at the points where it was so frustrating that I rage quit Scribblenauts, which sounds weird.
You rage quit your imagination.
I rage quit my DS. I just slammed it shut and walked away.
Rage sleep.
Shell.
That's like kind of stamping your feet in slippers.
Yeah.
Rage
On this
quitting
side,
the
the game
DS.
is incredibly original. I love what they did with using vocabulary. I'm a huge word nerd. I like crossword puzzles and word games and Will Shorts. And so there was so much that I wanted to love it so much, and yet the gameplay for me was so broken.
I just wanted D-pad controls.
Yeah.
That would have fixed
what?
so many things for me.
That would have changed a lot on that one. But, I mean, yeah, I have to say I wasn't a huge fan. I can see how just the sheer originality of the concept,
Sure.
and they went so far with the execution, it made it to the list. But, I mean, Brian, in terms of this year, would you consider this to be a good year or a bad year for original games?
I think with the economy and people sort of going back to sequels, this might be the last year we're going to see a lot of original games. I mean, you looked at the sales for Brutal Legend, and they were pretty disappointing, and hopefully Tim Schafer gets to do something original again soon, but that may not be the case. But I thought it was great. A lot of original stuff like Flower and Shadow Complex coming on PSN and Xbox Live Arcade. I thought it was a good year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point. When we put together this list next year, I know that we're going to find 5, but will it be even more that are going to be downloadable versus something that you're going to get in retail?
I think it might be handheld. It might be downloadable. It's going to come through different distribution channels than these AAA original games. I think that is going to be the big thing that plays out in the next couple of years. Is we talked about like EA's experiment with Mirror's Edge. Like if that was scaled back, maybe it was a downloadable. Like there's just different ways to approach it than a $60 AAA game. And I think it's unfortunate that those things aren't going to work because we would all like them to, but that's just a market reality, and that I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Let's talk about some of those technical categories. You know that part of the Oscars where everyone goes snoozy?
Yeah.
They're like, all right, wake me up when I get over to Best Actor. I find those very fascinating. I would like to think that my colleagues here also find it
It's
fascinating.
the boring part of feedback. Get ready, kids.
And one of the things that we started to do this in our categories about 3 or 4 years ago is that there are certain things that can happen in a game and where the game may not be awesome itself, but that one particular aspect, like, wow, that was just really amazing and really is going to be a game changer for other games going forward. And we want to give an opportunity for that to be highlighted. Let's talk about the one that I think is quite discussable, and that is Best Art Direction, which is distinct from Best Graphics because most games look good. I don't care about the graphical fidelity.
You don't want to talk about pixel shaders for
No.
20 more minutes?
Oh, I love the pixel shaders.
Voxels. Bring back the voxels.
It's what people do with it, and I think there are some really interesting picks that came out this year because we had such interesting games: Assassin's Creed 2, The Beatles Rock Band, Borderlands, Brutal Legend, and Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. I think this was a good year for creativity.
I think so too. The ones that really stand out when I think back on the year, and I remember in my head, oh my God, the game looked like that, was, number one, well, there's Borderlands because they had changed that style so much from what we had originally seen of the game. But the Beatles Rock Band, I don't think I will ever forget seeing that opening cinematic and just kind of jaw on the floor.
Yeah.
Wow. And the end one, too, they did, and just the backgrounds of every song that you're playing, they're just beautiful. They're on their kind of music videos. And then definitely Brutal Legend. The creativity that went into all the characters in that game, Diviculus and Ophelia and Dark Ophelia, and then and the worlds, and you have all these scenery points where you're looking at different parts in the game, and they were all just really spectacular. I really loved the art.
It was like Brutal Legend. I wasn't a metalhead when I grew up, but on some level, I think Tim Schafer's imagination and mine are very, very similar, where there was just that exuberant sense of both the dark and the comic and the whimsical all working together. I was like, I think I, on some level, have also imagined at some point in time a world not altogether different than the one in Brutal Legend. It exuberant is still the only word I can really find that I think best sums up what he did inside of that game. In terms of like sort of creativity, just on the list, off the list,
I mean, the environments in Uncharted 2 were just spectacular. From the very opening with the train car on the mountain, just a beautiful game, start to finish, and varied. You were in temples that were hidden underground. You were in cities on the rooftops, and just great.
It had a very strong sense of place.
And the train.
Yes, and the train. The whole idea that you actually are in one nonstop sequence that begins in, I guess, forest jungle, goes into a tunnel, comes out, and you're up there in the Himalayas. I mean, that is one of the most awe-inspiring kind of transitions I've seen. As a side note, I couldn't help but wonder that we didn't just see it in Uncharted 2, but in a handful of games. But I'm finally starting to see camera work in the games that is like, hold on, like where the camera doesn't really exist in a video game, yet now there's still sort of a use of that viewpoint that you would see more in a movie. And
I think because a lot of the major games tend to be first-person shooters or third-person games that don't really take you out of it. They don't take control of the camera all that much. When Uncharted does it and it's seamlessly integrated into the gameplay so well, it stands out.
Definitely. And their use of color in the game is also just really spectacular. I mean, it was one of the first things I noticed when I very first saw the game, and I was like, "Oh, is that my my path?" And then the color does a job of like guiding you around and showing where you to go, but it's very subtle and it's beautifully integrated.
Yeah, I mean, they figured out a way to draw your eye to where you want to go without kind of making it pop out like in a bad Hanna-Barbera cartoon or something. It's. I think where I also really remember noticing a lot of that color was, when you first get to the village in the Himalayas. And I know you're also a fan of Anthony Bourdain. And I know from one of his episodes where he went out to like the furthest reaches of China, where there is kind of a Tibetan Buddhist community there, and all those, it looked exactly like that. And so they had done their research, and it just was this refreshing look of color after all those complaints we've always had that the palette's been so drab the past few years in
brown.
Games. Patrick, in terms of sort of art direction, I mean, are you seeing more creativity this year?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more creativity. And when I was trying to figure out, what my list was and what I wanted to vote for, Uncharted 2, or not Uncharted, but Assassin's Creed 2 almost felt like it was cheating because its setting and the locations it picked were just naturally going to be
beautiful,
absolutely gorgeous and beautiful and breathtaking because it picked some of the most, awe-inspiring places in history at the height. And so, the way they recreated it is incredible. The way that I had a friend that was able to use Google Maps to track down a feather because they had recreated the landscape so specifically. And but it was just I was very impressive. But I was like, I almost don't want to give it to you because of course you picked these amazing
If Assassin's Creed
places.
2 had taken place in the black hole of Calcutta.
They
clearly would have been working out of a deficit, but they picked two of the most beautiful cities on planet Earth, Venice and Florence.
But then it was also to that game's credit that so many other games aren't willing to explore these other settings, and the reason that it strikes out so much and is so vibrant is because you just don't see that in games.
And it is. I talked with some people here about Saboteur that we felt that we had this renewed enthusiasm for Saboteur because of Assassins, because one thing that no one's really considered in video games is that, you can go anywhere and you can also go at any time. And there is a sense of sort of wonderment about these past, I don't want to say civilizations, but, these past times when, these city-states of Italy were just these amazing places. And, we'll never get to go there in that period. Right. And games really are an ability to transport us. And there was that sudden thought of, wow, France during the occupation sounds like it might have some degree of romance.
But imagine if instead of reading through a history book, chapter 4, you could have played something like Assassin's Creed and watched those videos that explain the different buildings and the characters and that. I think, there's a lot of violence in these games.
I would remember killing people.
Hey, there was a lot of violence in history, so I don't think it's really that disingenuous.
Exactly.
I want to see in 200-300 years, and they start making video games, and then we're the past, and they make video games set in this decade, and then
in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and the 80s, and because and being able, it would be awesome to be able to look back at that and go, man, you guys have it all wrong, or it wasn't,
Grand Theft Auto, the aughts.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the 80s. You can go to Soho when it wasn't pricey. And it's kind of like, oh, look, I'm going to make a little hut out of these needles I found on the road. Oh, come on. Go watch the Basquiat movie. You'll know what I'm talking about.
Move on.
Now you'll pay $2,000 for that little hut in the middle of the road.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm going to skip over some of the obvious categories. So I want to go to one that I I think this was a very good year for this, and that was sound design. Also because I love how I love this list because it has a couple of obvious ones, such as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and I think Killzone 2. And then, I love seeing Left 4 Dead, and the other one is Beatles Rock Band, because I think we sometimes forget that. We always think about the soundtrack on music games, but it's like for that to actually really come alive and be something you want to interact with, there has to be a lot of play has to be done with that music to really do it.
Shooters are kind of a shoe-in. I mean, Call of Duty, it's so dependent on the sound that you hear in the game, whether you're listening to someone, knock out a window with a knife or sneaking around behind you. And, it's just, for me, it's like, it's so important when you're playing those games, and the games that do it well. It's obvious, but at the same time, it's just natural. So you almost don't even know how great it is. With Left 4 Dead, and I was thinking about this the other day because Mike Patton is going to be known less from his music ventures and more as creepy voices in video games in the future. Like, I don't know if kids, younger ones are going to understand that he has this whole musical legacy behind him.
Yes,
and they're just going to be like, you make really creepy noises. Because he did The Darkness, he did Left 4 Dead, he does the Special Infected.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was cracking me up. I don't know.
I just think that we need to get an interview with Mike Patton, because there's a question I've needed to ask him for the past 20 years about the liner notes to the first Mr. Bungle album, and I think I finally have a chance. Really, it's a long story. I'll do it in a letter from the editor.
You want me to just do the boomer noise?
Yeah. But no, the noises that he does create for the new Special Infected are so good.
Well, and I mean, sound that plays into the gameplay like it does in Left 4 Dead 2 or Modern Warfare 2, where it's audio cues. It's not just, oh, hey, there's a sound.
Yeah.
You can tell which Special Infected is around based on what you hear. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to point out the one that we haven't talked about as much, Uncharted 2, on the sound design. When they're in the nicer settings, sometimes that sound was enough to make me just kind of wish, I wouldn't mind being on that beach right now. I kind of miss it right now. Like, the visuals weren't doing it as much as it was some of the sounds, and just the idea of being in those temples, like that kind of quiet apprehension. I love those sounds, because I think it just brings back that wannabe adventurer in my 10-year-old brain right there. In terms of sound, good year for sound, bad year for sound. Did you hear sound?
And I hate to use the same reason, but again with the Beatles, it's like, God, they're cheating again, because it's like the Beatles. And to be fair, it's the remastered Beatles, so it sounds even better than ever. But yeah, it was one. I mean, the implementation of the music and where it's used and the cinematics, like all accumulated into why I thought it was an excellent decision.
And at the same time, you have the hardest charge too, because it's the Beatles, and if you screw that up,
exactly. It's
kind of like, here's a Fabergé egg. Now we're going to have a race. And when you get to the end of it, one other category, which I think was also I think a very good year, was for writing. I think we suddenly went, hey, these games are kind of mature, and not in that, breasty way. It's like, actually, they're written for adults, and like the way an adult can pay attention. Assassin's Creed 2, Batman Arkham Asylum, Brutal Legend, GTA 4, The Ballad of Gay Tony, and Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. Batman, and this is one of the places where Batman, which I think was a well-appreciated game by everyone here, really showed. And that, I mean, it's strange enough that we had a year where a superhero game was good, but we could say a superhero game had good writing.
Well, I think the tendency when you're working with superhero properties is to make them want to skew younger, because I think a lot of people view that audience as a younger audience, kids still into Spider-Man, to Superman, to Batman. And so to write it for adults and convince adults that that's a really viable property and of interest, I mean, even though they have the nostalgia for it, I think that's a lot harder task to make that mature.
And I think it really works in this game. As I've said, I just love the idea that, we've said how it kind of takes the model of a Metroid game. Mm-hmm. One of the things that has always been frustrating to me in the Metroid series is Samus just needs to find a better way to stop losing all her crap, and then have to spend the rest of the game finding it. And I love how in Batman, the way they kind of worked around that issue is, he wasn't expecting a bad day, and so we had to kind of get back to the Batcave to pick up some of the stuff.
Batman learned by now to always expect a bad day?
Yeah, it's true. Now it's like, hey, do you mind coming over to Arkham with the Joker? Oh, nothing could go wrong here.
No, not at all.
Don't bring your explosive gel.
Yeah, it just seemed to... Remember, he left that one in the car.
Yeah.
See, I love that. I just love that. Assassin's Creed 2, I think that is easily... people have been saying, like, oh, like, I don't understand. It's so confusing. It definitely is not making it as easy as possible and not going to spoon feed it. But I find that that's kind of the more delectable quality of the Assassin's Creed series is, like, there's this mystery and you're desperate to try to figure out what it is.
Well, and that's part of it, is that you kind of don't know what's going on. You're trying to get over sort of the accents. You're trying to get over, they play on, especially in Americans' case, like a complete unfamiliarity with the rest of the world and a sense of history. And so that, I am cognizant of that. And so a lot of it is catch up, is like rereading through those descriptions, watching those videos again. And it's one of those games that probably makes a whole lot more sense the second time you go through, when you can put those connections together earlier. But I think that's part of the fun, is that I don't really know what's going on, and I'm kind of watching this moment in history and also being a part of it, even though it's part of it's fantastical. I like that I'm kind of behind the curve, and because usually games are so easy to understand, and you don't have to put in the mental effort, and it's fun to go back and read the descriptions, read a Wikipedia, and like start to piece it together.
Who knew in the past that not everybody communicated through emoticons?
Yes, I was like, apparently
I thought they chiseled it.
Yeah.
Also, the way that they were able to take contemporary conspiracy theories and so integrate them. I mean, like, as I've said, they somehow wrote the scariest puzzles I have ever played in a video game. I mean,
yeah,
really,
those things are terrifying.
It's really unsettling. And like, there are times where, like, once I did one, I'm like, I just gotta leave the room. It's like, everything's okay. Yeah, Kennedy's dead, but it might just because of the lone gunman. It just might be. Really, it might be. So obviously, all of these nominees are up on our site, g4tv.com. We can't go through all of them, but I think it was a really interesting discussion. I think we've all kind of, it's nice looking back on the year and going, oh, that was good. Maybe I'll play that on holiday.
There were a lot of good games.
I do want to get to our reader question of the week. Week. This is about the role of games in education. It's from the user Greenboom. I am both a student and a teacher, so gaming and education have a special relationship in my life. On this topic, to what extent do you see video games having educational value? As well, are there specific genres that you believe have greater educational potential? Have you had experiences in your education where games made some crucial contribution to your comprehension of some idea? And can you envision a near future in which mainstream video games are part of a classroom curriculum? Greenboom, thank you for easily the best question I think we've ever had for feedback. I think this is even something that we can carry over to an entire episode, but I do want to address it here. I personally do. I think that certain games on certain levels do have educational value, but not in the most formalized manner.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was really only allowed to watch educational TV and video games things. No,
same with me.
Fine.
I grew up in Berkeley. I'm with you.
Right.
I was a PBS kid.
Sure, same. But the thing was, there were a lot of games that I played as a kid, whether it was Number Munchers or Number Crunchers, and Mavis Beacon teaches typing. She taught me to type, sort of. Got bad at her. And Where in the World was Carmen Sandiego was huge, and I would be looking up things through that. I mean, there were games that taught me, and that I still remember lessons that I learned in them. And I still think that they're a valuable asset to kids because, at any rate, they were fun, and that encouraged me to learn math and to, not that I wouldn't have anyway, but...
Yeah, but sometimes it's good to be tricked into learning than it is to just learn.
In that vein, I think I played Civilization when I was really young, and I didn't really have too much information about the world in it, but it at least told you, hey, pottery was pretty important back then. Oh, okay. But I think more modern.
SimCity taught me about Godzilla.
What's your takeaway from pottery being important?
It was pretty important.
Watch, he's gonna be like the CEO of Pottery Barn, and
it gives you more gold per turn. Did you know that? But I think for games now and sort of kids now, it's more of puzzles like in things like Assassin's Creed teach logic and critical thinking and problem solving. Things like our 3D games and shooters teach spatial awareness and just thinking in a different way. So I think they're more educational in that way.
I think that one's a little less over.
No, but I do actually somewhat agree with Brian that I think the problem solving is definitely because I look at platformers like a Banjo-Kazooie or something like that where they are presenting these puzzles and you just you're having to think sort of logically to figure out. And I've seen kids solve some of these better than I have, because I think that there's a certain quality of how I'm supposed to approach a problem these days that don't always work in the video game world. Then you have Tim Schafer's Green Rock and Grim Fandango, and no one should ever understand that puzzle ever in the history of anything.
You always love to bring that up.
Yeah.
But I do, and the reason I brought, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego is that was a game that also encouraged you to research and learn on your own. It came with, and the early ones came with the World Almanac, and then the later ones came with Microsoft Encarta. Remember, Encarta? But I love that because even after I was done playing that game, I would look through Encarta and I would just, go through and read about lots of different things I didn't know about. It It was setting you on all of these paths to learn more about things that were intriguing. And I think that there should be more video games that encourage kids to do that and learn on their own outside of just playing video games.
And that's
Because
why
my
I
mother
think-
will kill me if I tell you that I think that video games should encourage kids to learn.
Like Assassin's Creed minus
I was
the
about to
killing
say.
does a phenomenal job of that. Also, man, it would have been way cooler if I didn't play the frickin' recorder and I could have just played Beatles Rock Band. Would have learned a lot more about music through playing Beatles Rock Band than I would have like attempting to play something on the recorder. But I think, yeah, there are.
Did you take classes on the recorder?
Everybody had
everyone
to.
had to.
I did not.
I had a recorder, but I always thought it was just kind of like, here you go, kid, you did something right. Have a recorder.
At the same
No,
time,
this
in my
is- this
school,
is
we had
forced
music
curriculum,
programs
yeah.
from,
And you
from
guys use
kindergarten.
recorders,
and
right?
They
I
don't
learned
exist anymore,
violin.
kids, but
Yeah, music
No.
there
programs.
used to be
remember
music
them?
programs.
There's probably an iPhone app.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you
there
know
is
what?
actually.
And,
Yeah, there
and
you
you know
go.
what? That's a very interesting point, though, because we've seen such obscene cuts into a lot of those type of programs in schools. They're only like sort of preserving sports and they're getting rid of theater and stuff like that. I hate to say it, but one of the few areas that some of that could be supplemented is through video games. I mean,
Oregon Trail in class.
Yeah.
Oregon Trail, but
Everybody fought
but
over
even
that
Rock Band. I
computer.
mean, look, right now that might be as good as you're going to give someone a music education. At least basic rhythm is
Well,
being taught.
I have read that some research has been done into Rock Band and music and how kids actually consider it. And because we didn't have it when we were growing up, we take it as, oh, I'm playing this song, this is the music, and I'm interacting with it. And a lot of kids that are really exceptional at it are just seeing, oh, it's telling me to press green now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to press green. Now it's red. I'm going to press red. And they don't really see it in their mind as interacting with music.
Now, interestingly enough, as one of the numerous kids out there that was put into piano class, there is that point where it that's how I saw the piano in the beginning. If someone could have actually sort of also taught me the pleasure of playing the piano, I think
Because
those
when
two
you're
things
learning,
would
it's
have worked
then again,
together.
if you don't
memorization.
have that talent to begin with,
Yeah.
where you're going to create your own songs and everything, and it's screwed. I think my final point on that is, I told you last week I was in Washington D.C. and I was at the mall in the Smithsonian collection, and there were advertisements everywhere for Night at the Museum, Battle at the Smithsonian. Everything was branded with it. It was in the gift shops. It was on the subway, ads, all in the mall. And at first I was just like, oh my God, you've kidding me. This is terrible. Like, I don't like that, incursion onto what those
There's
museums
something
are to me.
sanctified about the
And
Smithsonian.
at the same time, I had to admit, I'm like, if it's encouraging kids to get out there and go to museums and learn about them and educate themselves, then maybe it's not as bad as my initial,
You gotta
oh
trick
God,
'em.
that movie sucked.
You have to trick the kids. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to be tricked into learning. And, that's what Number Munchers did. That's what Carmen Sandiego did. They're all
Yeah.
tricking you into learning.
Which is good, because I think you'll learn better sometimes that way. I think my final comment on that is, I think also as people get older, the video games can become a very good tool in teaching critical thinking. And I've encouraged this on the soapbox, that to ask the question, what is working in this game that's making you have a pleasurable time? To deconstruct it that way answers and asks some very, very fascinating questions. And that because people seem to really be into video games, it sometimes is more useful to use a cultural product that you don't have to teach someone to appreciate, and the appreciation is already there. You've already made those kind of inroads. Guys, obviously we are out of time. After a fascinating and wonderful discussion, I would like to thank my panelists, Abby Heppy, Brian Leahy, Patrick Klepek. We will
Thank
be
you.
back next week. Check and see what you are being encouraged to comment on. See if you can beat Green Boom for an awesome question. Thank you again for that one. I think I'm going to be following up on matters of that on the soapbox as well. Guys, thanks for coming. See you next week.